Hello and welcome to my channel. So this is the April 2022 wrap up, and this is where I'll be talking about the books that I finished reading in April. I finished reading 7 books altogether, but in this video I'll be talking about only 5 books, because 2 of those books were the books that I read for the Booktube Prize, and I am not going to talk about those books until this round ends, and that will be after May. So that's quite a while for me to to restrain myself from expressing my thoughts about those books. But I might be doing some kind of a vloggy video for those books instead, so who knows. Maybe I will at least have some more immediate outlet to release some of those pent-up thoughts. Anyway, before I start with talking about the books in this wrap-up video, let me just say that I just had some sort of a minor discovery about myself. Yeah, don't hope for something too momentous. It's something that is really tiny, and that is, it has something to do with my process of making booktube videos. Basically, it will show in this wrap-up video, because in this video I won't be holding any books. Like, I won't be doing this kind of stuff, but rather I'll be having the photos of the book covers showing up on screen here, I think maybe here, and it sort of feels kind of awkward to me, to be honest. I mean, I have felt this way in past videos as well, in which sometimes I would just talk about a book, but then I won't be holding anything, and it just felt awkward. And at that time I couldn't really pinpoint what I was feeling or why I was feeling that way, but there was something that felt missing. And yeah, it is certainly, it was certainly the missing book, or rather the fact that I wasn't holding anything. I wasn't holding any book while I was talking about it. So in this video I'm not going to hold any book, and so I must say it is going to be kind of awkward for me now that I realize what's going on. But yeah, I'm gonna proceed anyway, because these books are not with me anymore, at least for the time being. I'm in the process of moving out, so these books are on their way or already in my at my East Malaysian home, so they're not with me now. Anyway, let's start with the first book, and that would be The Memory Police by Yōko Ogawa. So this book was originally written in Japanese and was translated into English by Snyder. So I actually had a video in which I was talking about this book. It was supposed to be like a chatty video, but then I ended up talking about this book for most of that video, so you can check that out. It will contain most of my thoughts about this book, so I'm not going to talk more about it in this video. Basically, The Memory Police is a novel about this novelist who lives on an island, presumably in Japan. And apparently what goes on this island is that periodically things will be disappeared, and the party responsible for disappearing these random items, we're talking about items such as a jade, things like birds, perfumes, I think the fruits and flowers are also disappeared in this novel. Those kinds of stuff, seemingly inconsequential items are being disappeared from this island, and the people responsible are this organization called the Memory Police. And what happens when a thing is disappeared is that majority of the inhabitants on this island will also lose their memory of these, of this particular disappeared item. So they will not remember the existence of these, all of these items that have been disappeared before. However, a handful of people on this island do in fact retain memories of these items, and these people are sort of being hunted down by and apprehended by the memory police, because obviously these people are a threat to the activity of the memory police. Now, our protagonist, the novelist, she does not have this ability to retain the memory. She, like most of the other inhabitants on this island, would sort of just forget about the things that are disappeared. So there's nothing really special about this protagonist. However, the protagonist's editor, he has this ability to remember, and because of that, the novelist is really worried that the editor will be caught by the memory police, and so she sets out to hide her editor to make sure that the memory police does not go out and find him and catch him. Now, there is also another motivation that sort of drives the novelist to do this, to carry out this action, which is actually something that is quite dangerous for her to do as well, because it's sort of like harboring a criminal, but she does it anyway, and there is apparently another motivation to that. I'm not going to tell you what motivation that is. You're going to have to find that out yourself. Anyway, I thought that for the most part, this book just felt sort of slow. It's basically a very quiet and contemplative book, and much of the action, I would say, happens at the final quarter of this book. So the first 3 quarters are just kind of like slow going, and it's a very quiet for the most part. And I would say the ending of this book just felt so grotesque, and I thought it was nice. Overall, I wouldn't say that I enjoyed this book in a traditional sense, but I actually still gave it 4 out of 5 stars, because this book got me thinking. It sort of reminds me of how, in real life, these parallels that we have, like how things in the past are sort of being erased, and people in the present time, the newer generation, don't remember, or not say they don't remember, but they don't have any knowledge of those things, because there is no collective memory of those things left, because they have been sort of being censored or erased from history, history books and stuff. And so people in the present, they don't know about those things. So it also reminds me a little bit about revisionism as well. Sort of about, reminds me of those aspects of our lives. But this book, to say that it is I wouldn't say that it's a pure dystopian, because this book is sort of marketed as dystopia. Not marketed as dystopia, marketed as dystopian fiction. And I thought that label is something that is certainly functions more as a buzzword that would get people to buy the book, but I wouldn't say that it's a dystopian fiction a la 1984 or The Handmaid's Tale, where you can really get that social commentary angle. Like that aspect of those books is really strong. However, in The Memory Police, it's just mostly personal. It's mostly about the protagonist, this novelist's life, and her experience, and especially her experience in hiding this editor because of reasons. And yeah, it's a very personal book. It's not so much of a social commentary kind of a book, although you do get that political angle from it. So, yeah, those are my thoughts about The Memory Police. Certainly a thought-provoking book. Not a book that I would say was, so much of a page turner, but I would say I still appreciate it in other ways. So, from an unnamed island in Japan, we moved on to San Francisco in the 1970s. And so the next book that I finished was Armistead Maupin's Tales of the City. So, this book was actually a cover buy. I actually got like 6 books in total of this whole series, Tales of the City. I think there are 9 books in the series, if I'm not mistaken, but I got 6 of them. And it was mostly because the cover was just so beautiful. They're so so vibrant, and I have always had this interest in trying out this series because it seems to be like I would say, sort of like, it has this reputation of being a nice book of queer literature, especially on how it explores the LGBT scene in 1970 San Francisco. And so I tried it, and it was nice. I really loved it. This book was kind of like a blend of comedy, some humor as well, but at the same time it also explores themes that are serious and dark, such as homophobia, drug use, mental health also. So basically many different kinds of things, serious and humorous things, they sort of coexist together. And so basically, I haven't talked about what this book is about. So Tales of the City, we actually follow a protagonist. Her name is Marianne, and she's from Cleveland, and she one day decides to move and stay in San Francisco because she wants to sort of start a new life there. Now, because she hails from Cleveland, and the kinds of life that she had in Cleveland was so much different from the life that she will encounter in San Francisco. She sort of acts like this really naive protagonist, sort of like an audience surrogate in a way. And we kind of follows Marianne as she explores the life in San Francisco, and also the people that she would eventually meet when she decides to rent at a place called 28th Barbary Lane. And this book is just so vibrant with different kinds of characters in it. We encounter the people that Marianne encounters in the place that she rents, and also outside of that. And we see the kinds of sort of like close to culture shock, but not exactly, kinds of experience that would be kind of shocking to Marianne, as she's not exactly familiar with the atmosphere of San Francisco, where something that kind of shocks her. There are people who uses drug openly. There are gay people, sort of stuff, and also people who just engage in sexual activities freely as well. Those are the things that Marianne considers to be kind of new and strange, and she finds it kind of difficult to, be to get accustomed with at the beginning. But eventually she learns how to, she learns more about acceptance. She learns basically how to sort of appreciate her life in San Francisco. I would say that this book is sort of like it is one of the books that explores the idea of safe space, especially when it comes to the LGBTQ community. And I would say, especially the setting, 28 Barbary Lane is pretty much the embodiment of a safe space in this book. I would say that this book feels kind of heartwarming. It is overall a positive book, but a book that also does not shy away from serious topics. I also like the way that it describes San Francisco in this book in the 70s. I'm not saying that this book gives an accurate picture of what happens at that time, because obviously I've never been to San Francisco in the 70s, so I wouldn't know how it feels like. But the way that it describes the setting in this book just feels really alive, and it feels like you're somewhere. It feels very vivid. And I have actually been to San Francisco once, and there were certain aspects of this book that just sort of felt kind of familiar to me, because I have seen them, but that was a couple of years ago. So quite recent, but still there was this vibe that I could sort of resonate with. So it's kind of like a mixture of familiar things and also unfamiliar things, which I thought was really neat. So yeah, overall this was a lovely book, and I'm certainly going to continue with the series. Hopefully later this year. Then we'll move on to the third book, and that will be the Vagina Monologues by Ensler. So I would say this book was an interesting one. I don't know how I discovered this book. I think it was from a bookseller on Instagram, and I thought that the title was just so interesting. Obviously the cover was attention grabbing. But yeah, I decided to get this book, and it was such a breezy read. This book is a sort of like a collection of monologues that concerns the experience surrounding the female sexual organ. And I say female sexual organ because even though it uses the word vagina to refer to, the reproductive organ that is in question in this book, sometimes they actually refer to vulva. And the fact that, there is this kind of like contention on what to call certain things, this book also gets kind of meta in a way, because that is also one of the topic of one of the monologues in this book, on what people are actually referring to when they use the word vagina. Was it vagina versus vulva? Anyway, there's just like one particular part of this book. Other things that are explored in other monologues in this book are also kind of things such as sexual encounters, also about personal care, things such as sexual assault, which is certainly a bit more serious as well. We also have things such as menstruation, we have things such as pregnancy, all of these topics that have something to do with vagina or the female reproductive organ as a whole are being explored in this book. Now, I wouldn't say that this book is a definitive list of all the kinds of experiences that women get to have, especially when it comes to the vagina. But I must say that this book has, it presents such an interesting voice, a voice that is kind of humorous at certain parts, but also is quite serious in some of the parts as well, especially when talking about topics that requires a little bit more seriousness, such as sexual assault. Overall, I thought that this book is a book that everyone should read. I don't think that, I mean, obviously, this book is, it does not represent the voice of every woman or people identifying as women out there. But the way that this book is written, it sort of tries to dispel this kind of like sense of taboo surrounding the word vagina. And it sort of reminds me of my own personal experience. Because in many cultures around the world, the word for vagina or the word for female sexual organ in general are kind of like seen as taboo. And it just felt kind of strange to me as a kid, and it still feels strange to me also right now. I sort of get why, but the reason why to me is also kind of doesn't make a lot of sense. I remember as a kid, generally, every boys and girls are allowed to say the words for the male sexual organ. Everyone can say penis, but the word for vagina or vulva are not allowed, are kind of like forbidden to be to be spoken by kids. Maybe girls can say the word, but certainly not boys. And at that time, as a kid, I was just like, I found it so strange because I couldn't find a logical reason to that. Now, when I sort of think about it, these days, it sort of reminds me of the implication that it could have, the codification of the word that we assign to female sexual organs, and the kinds of taboo that we associate with it, the kinds of purity culture that we associate with it, which to me is something that has presented negative impact on society in general, especially when it comes to treatment of women and women's rights, all those things. So this is one of those books that I would say everyone should read. I really recommend this book to everyone because this book is just awesome. I really like the way that it tries to dispel that notion that vagina is this like really mysterious and unknown and something that is sort of like hidden and negative. Yeah, that's kind of like the vibe that I get a lot from from the taboos. Is that female sexual organs are sort of being treated with this kind of like negative vibe, and I don't know, it's just strange. So yeah, awesome book, definitely recommend to everyone. The next book that I finished is also a book that I would recommend to every single person out there, and this is a book that I think so far from what I've seen on BookTube, I discovered this book on BookTube, by the way. Everyone has been raving about this book. Everyone loved this book, and I must say I count myself as one of those people now. And that would be Stoner by John Williams. Okay, so Stoner is about this the life of a man called William Stoner. So we follow his life since he's a boy growing up in a farm all the way until his death. And by the time of his death, he becomes a professor in literature, teaching literature at a university. So what happens in this book is that we follow how he sort of starts out as a farm boy, and how he is able to land a spot at a university, and in the university something pivotal happens to him, and that is his discovery of literature, and he instantly falls in love with literature. Now, although this book is about how he loves literature a lot, we also see the kinds of challenges that he is facing when he becomes older. You know, the kinds of challenges that he faces in his marriage, the challenges that he faces in his other aspects of personal life, which, you know, outside of his marriage, if something happens, and also the challenges that he faced as you know, when he eventually becomes a professor, when he works as a professor at the university, the kinds of politics that he has to face and how he sort of navigates through that. I would say this entire book is a quiet book. It is a book that doesn't try to be a spectacle. We follow his life, and there's like sort of, I wouldn't say monotonous. I'm not sure what the word is, but it doesn't, you know, it just sort of sounds nearly the same. You know what, maybe monotonous, but usually we use the word monotonous for things that are boring, but in this case, it is kind of like, it sort of sounds the same in, you know, same as inconsistent, but it does not feel boring. It feels very engaging, even though nothing much really occurs in Stoner's life. But what makes it really important, what makes it really exciting is that, you know, all the tiny details that happen in Stoner's life that just sort of makes it feel kind of adventurous in a way. Yeah. I guess that's how you would describe it. It is not bombastic, certainly. You don't have people killing dragons in this book, but it's all the little moments, all the reflective moments that Stoner has, his contemplative moments, of all the different details, all the different little decisions that you have to face moving forward in his life that makes this book really exciting. Also, another thing about this book that I really love is how it sort of puts focus on this idea of success. Now, I'm from an Asian country. So generally in my society, there's definitely this idea of what success is and how success has to look like. Basically, success is, for, you know, in general, is something that can only be considered as legit when you have something to show for it. You know, you gotta show it with your job, or you gotta show it with your dazzling money or your position or whatnot. As long as there is some kind of a signifier of a success, and, you know, then it can be considered a success. And that sort of becomes kind of like a stressor to a lot of people here in my society, at least. And I think it sort of happens like that in other cultures, other countries as well, many countries also. But this book is kind of like it's kind of like a book that shows the middle finger to that idea. And I love that. I feel like this book is sort of like rebellious in that sense. You know, it's kind of like saying, you know what? Stoner in this book, even though he lives a life that people would consider as unremarkable, he is essentially successful. And as a protagonist, you know, we can certainly see that when we read his story. We can certainly get that vibe when we read the story. We can get the sense of triumph in this book when we read the story all the way until the end. There's definitely this wow moment. But the thing is, his success does not come with fanfare. His success is just really quiet, and it seems kind of inspiring. Yeah, it is. This book feels reassuring. Stoner is by no means a perfect character. He has many flaws. But the way that this entire book just frames this idea of what it means to have a meaningful life is, it sort of gives us a totally different perspective on how it is to, what it means to live your life in a fulfilling way. And yeah, I just thought that was really interesting, really fascinating. Certainly an antithesis to what I would say many people in my society to consider as the traditional idea, the conventional idea of success. And I thought, that was so awesome. Anyway, I really love Stoner. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. Definitely one of my latest favorite of all time. So, moving on to the final book that I finished in April, I would say I ended April with a rather unsatisfying book, unfortunately. And that would be Two Figures in a Car and Other Stories by Phing Lim. So, Two Figures in a Car and Other Stories is a collection of short stories, and most of these short stories are set in Malaysia and Singapore. So, based on the description at the back of this book, these stories, they intend to tell stories about characters, gray characters who engage in amoral or questionable activities, and kind of like stories that allow us to get into these characters and just sort of follow their stories as they commit these questionable things. Now, it is true in the sense that most of these stories, if not all of these stories, are in fact about characters who engage in questionable things. I'm talking about various kinds of crimes, stealing, robbing, killing, raping, all of those things. But what I found to be quite unsatisfactory about this short story collection is that, number one, most of the stories in here features characters that are very one-dimensional. And I think this is the biggest weakness of this book. I feel that if you want to write a story that is about characters that is about gray characters, you really need to put in more effort on characterization, more effort into motivation, because only then we can, the readers can get into their psyche and sort of just get into their heads and hopefully sympathize or even empathize with this character as they commit those questionable things. But at least readers can see those characters not as crappy people, but at least people with tangible motivation, But what I ended up getting from this book is that these characters are just sort of being written as people who committed those acts, but then that's it. And so they sort of appear as crappy people to me. I don't see any gray side to their being, to their personality, because I don't get to spend a lot of time relating or understanding these characters. I'm not given the opportunity to have that interaction with these characters, and so they just sort of remain as a black and white character to me, which is a shame, because I thought that many of the stories here have promise. So there are also other issues that I found with this short story collection. One story in particular, it has a very weird construction, and I feel that it really needed some kind of editing. Basically, this story is about this police officer who is investigating a complaint made by this family regarding their mom. And later he discovers that the mom is actually dead, and the family is making false claims about this mom. But the sort of like the punchline of this book, I won't say the punchline, the main point about this book is the police officer's relationship with his father, because apparently this family is making this false claim about this mom because the son wants to do something for his father, because his father is grieving for this mom who apparently has died a while ago. I know it sounds confusing, but what's worse is that the main idea of this book and how it actually ends with this police officer rethinking about his relationship with his father, who turns out to be abusive. Are you able to see what I was talking about? Basically, I only mentioned about the abusive father at the end, and that was exactly what I read. I thought I missed something at the beginning, but no, I don't think so. The story just sort of changed direction in this way that is so far from how it was first introduced. There was no hint of any abusive father at the beginning, but somehow this story turns out to be a story about abusive father. So it was so strange and really confusing. If you thought my description was confusing, well, that's what I felt. And one of my most memorable experience with this book, the first story, I thought first stories of any short story collection have to be really punchy and has to be able to grab your attention so that you can stay for other stories at the end. But the first story was not only not punchy, but it was also borderline offensive because of how it sort of treats its queer character. I'm just gonna go with spoilers in here. I mean, the previous story I mentioned was a spoiler description also. So basically, in this story, the first story, the main character is a lesbian because she hates her father, and therefore she hates men, and that's why she becomes a lesbian. It's offensive, for me at least. Why? Okay, anyway, that's all. I thought that this short story collection was not really my taste. Maybe there are other people who liked it. When I was rating this book on Goodreads, I saw it only had like 16 ratings, and it got like 4.1 or 4.2 ratings, But then when I gave it 2 out of 5 stars, the rating sort of dropped significantly. And it seems like mine was the only one that gave it 2 stars, so I don't know. People are sort of going to see my, you know, how salty I felt with this book. But anyway, that's how I felt about it. So, that's it for all of the books that I read in April 2022. I must say that the first book that I finished in May, which I've already finished by the way, turns out to be a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful one. So it was really awesome to get back from a rather unfun reading experience. So with that, I am going to end this video. If you have read any of these books, let me know your thoughts about them, or maybe you are interested in reading any of these books also, or any other things that you want to mention. Feel free to comment down below. I'll see you again in a different video. So until then, take care, thanks for watching, and bye!